Ever since we started using computers, people have been stealing and manipulating data.
They change the password every couple of weeks, but I know where they write it down.
But in recent years, hacking and storing data has become increasingly complex.
System breach.
Oh.
Firewall 1.
We got a problem.
What?
Someone synced a rat to one of my servers. A remote access tool. We're being hacked.
By Loxat?
I don't know.
But we've been so careful. How could they find us?
They haven't found us yet. Just cracked the outer layer.
In the past, these problems may have only impacted tech companies and governments. But now, this is the new normal for football clubs and organizations as well. As we chronicled last week, clubs are collecting more data than ever before. Every action, every movement on a pitch is captured, tracked, and recorded. But what happens to this data once it's stored? Who is protecting it, and how? Today we ask, how safe is football's data?
We've been working closely with sporting organisations right across the sector since the National Cybersecurity Centre was born in 2016.
Sarah Lyons is the Deputy Director for Economy and Society Engagement at the National Cybersecurity Centre.
This report is a part of that work and is designed to sort of illustrate the cyber threat that the sector as a whole is facing.
So can you explain why data protection and cybersecurity is especially important for football clubs and leagues?
Sports organisations of all kinds are relying on IT and their wider technology to manage their venues, to put on their events and to provide their internal administration as they run the organisation. So any loss of access to that IT through a cyber attack could have a big impact, for example, through a loss of data, through funds being taken from the sports organisation, or from a potential disruption to events.
Just how widespread are these issues concerning data protection and cybersecurity?
Well, the survey that we did of the sports organisations gave us a real sense of the most common cyber attacks that are seen across the sector. 70% of the organisations surveyed reported one attack per year. And regardless of the size of the organisation or the individual sport, we saw a range of similar incidents. So the publication of the report is a way of showing other sports bodies in the sector some of the threat that they may face from cyber attack, and it gives some steps that sports bodies can take to reduce the risk of them becoming a victim to these kinds of attacks.
You mentioned that 70% of sports organizations have experienced one of these cyber attacks. How does that compare to normal businesses?
Well, on the basis of what we know from this survey, that's rather higher than we would see for normal businesses. So we felt that this was quite an important point, and that given the threat the sector was facing, we wanted to be able to share what we'd learned with sporting bodies right across the sector, not just elite sports, but through to community-based sports organisations as well, because it's clear that the sector is a definite target for those attackers.
Do you know if football clubs are more or less susceptible compared to other sports organizations?
Well, I think, as I said, that what we found was there are a lot of similar incidents across the sector, regardless of the sport involved. And the primary threat comes from a compromise of business emails, which potentially allows criminals to engineer fraudulent payments or steal data. And obviously football, especially elite football, is believed to have lots of money within it. So that is going to be an attractive target for a cyber criminal.
Before we get into kind of how these attacks are carried out, and you just kind of alluded to it, who are the people that are making these attacks? Who is attacking who and kind of for what reason?
The threat primarily comes from cyber criminals who are looking to have financial gain from the sports sector. And because sport is so much a part of our national life in Britain, from the grassroots level right through to the national teams, sport has a lot of people involved with it and quite a lot of money too. So that makes it a really attractive target to those motivated by financial gain. Where sport contributes billions of pounds to the economy, that makes it a very, very attractive target for someone looking to make money.
Yeah, I believe the number I saw in your report was that each incident cost roughly £10,000 to address.
Yes, that's what the estimated financial damage to any club is, about £10,000 for each incident.
So how are these attacks carried out? You mentioned business emails. A lot of people have heard the terms malware before. How are these things carried out?
Yes, as I said, the main one is business email compromise, which allows criminals to use an email address to engineer a sort of fraudulent payment or steal some data. And the attacks themselves need not be particularly technically clever in order for the attacker to get in. So we see a lot of different ways to introduce malware, as you've described. So one might be phishing, for example, which is where you get an email which encourages you to click on a link to a fraudulent website.
While checking your email, you receive an alarming message from your bank. It says that your account might be jeopardized and provides a link to enter in your private information. Even though the logos and contact information appear to be correct, this email wasn't from your bank, but instead it was sent by cybercriminals looking to phish you. Phishing is when scammers trick you into divulging personal and financial information by pretending to be a legitimate source. Just like fishermen cast lines with bait attached.
Another one is credential stuffing, where we see people's email addresses and frequently used passwords thrown into systems. Another one is password spraying, for example, where an attacker would take common passwords like 1234556 and tries to use those to access a large number of accounts. And interestingly, last year NCSC found the names of Premier League clubs to be one of the most commonly used passwords and therefore one of the most commonly breached passwords. So I think we found the Premier League clubs were the ones right at the top of that list.
Interesting. You mentioned business emails being compromised. Can you give an example of maybe an incident in the past where that's happened?
Yes, so one of the examples that we got from our survey was that there was a payment fraud from a Premier League football club. And we found that the managing director had been a victim of clicking on a targeted email, which then took that person to a spoof, a faked page, where they entered their credentials, their password, and then the criminals immediately had those credentials to be able to enter the system and act as them when they were trying to commit their attack. So they were able to, with their knowledge of how Premier League football worked, they were able to seek to divert a payment of nearly £1 million as part of a transfer deal in that club. In this case, the money wasn't lost because the Premier League club's bank stopped it. There was a fraud marker on the criminal's account. But I think what's really interesting about that is the way that the attacker was used a way in through the email and then waited for the right time, understood when there would be a big transfer of money likely to take place. So it's quite sophisticated understanding of when to deliver their attack.
Are there any other examples you can give about attacks that have happened to football clubs or people in football?
Yes, we saw a cyber attack which included ransomware against an English Football League club. And this attack effectively crippled the systems and the network of the club. And they were asked to pay a ransom in order to be able to access their own systems again. So their whole IT estate, including their CCTV, their turnstiles, weren't working whilst the attack was taking place, and they could potentially have had to cancel a match. So they had quite a lot of cost of putting that right, and they had the worry that cancelling a match, would have for their funds and for their reputation.
So on the one hand, we have £1 million was almost lost. A game was almost lost as well in another attack. I mean, these are big ramifications for cyber attacks.
Yes, very much so. And that's why it's really important that organisations and clubs who run, maybe even without realising it, quite large and complex systems to do their events, to run their whole administrations, they need to think about their cybersecurity, to read about the kind of threats that they might be facing and to think how it could potentially affect them, and to take a few simple, actionable steps to protect themselves from falling victim in a similar way.
What are clubs doing to kind of combat this?
The clubs that we're speaking to and talking to about what they can do, there's quite a lot of security measures that they can take, and often they're not particularly high cost measures, but they can really boost a sports organisation's cybersecurity. We have lots of guidance on our website, which is ncsc.gov.uk, but there's quite a lot of steps that can be taken. There are some technical steps around email security, the examples I've given around business email compromise. There are technical controls you can put in place to stop that happening. You can put multi-factor authentication on your accounts, which limits the chances of success. And those are really important measures that an organisation can take. You can also work really hard to empower your own staff within a club or sports body so they can be your best defence if they can spot a suspicious or strange looking email, but really importantly also that they know how to report it and how to report it quickly so that the organisation can prevent an attacker being in a system or try and prevent them from being in a system for very long. And then the senior leadership of an organisation or club can have a look at their overall cyber risk management. So look right across their networks, assess the sort of risks there might be, and make sure that they are protecting operations and assets effectively. So that can include things like preparing plans in case of an incident, knowing how you would recover the organisation so that you wouldn't run the risk of having to cancel a match or something like that in the future.
Do you see these attacks increasing in the future in frequency and in magnitude?
It's difficult to say if they would increase anymore. The sector, as I've said, is already quite a target for criminals because of the perception that there is money flowing in the system. So I guess if criminals continue to see the sector as attractive and sports bodies don't take action to protect themselves, that could be a worrying combination. But we hope that by taking a few steps, the sector will be able to become better protected and more resilient to cyber attacks where they occur.
Are you a fan of football today? Then why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full interviews, and extra content. Just go on Patreon and search Football Today. Now, back to the episode. But if we really want to look at what the future might bring when it comes to cybersecurity, we need to look at the past. You might not realize it now, but there have already been a number of major cybersecurity breaches with the biggest clubs and individuals in world football. One of the most prominent cases is between Manchester City and Liverpool. Last year, the Times newspaper reported that back in 2013, Liverpool allegedly paid Manchester City a £1 million settlement following a complaint that 3 Liverpool scouts had accessed Manchester City's scouting platform illegally. Due to a private settlement between the two clubs, it is unclear today if the old employees used their previous logins or if the accounts were genuinely hacked. But what we do know is that isn't the only hacking scandal when it comes to scouting. In America, one of the biggest sports cybercrimes happened in baseball.
The FBI and Justice Department say they have discovered evidence that front office officials for the Cardinals, reportedly using old passwords, hacked into the computer network of the rival Houston Astros, whose general manager Jeff Luhnow used to work for the Cardinals, possibly accessing closely guarded player and scouting information.
You may be wondering what happened to that St. Louis employee, Christopher Correa. Well, he got sentenced to almost 4 years in prison. But scouting is just one element. One of the other most common kinds of hacking is of celebrities' social media accounts.
Several high-profile Twitter accounts appear to have been hacked, with comments posted about cryptocurrency. The hacked accounts include Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Uber, and Apple. Many of the tweets have already been deleted. To give you a sense of what these tweets...
Gianluigi Donnarumma, Chris Smalling, Dejan Lovren, and Samir Nasri are just some of the high-profile players whose social media accounts have been compromised in recent years. Except it's not just individuals, but teams as well. Perhaps the most famous social media attacks came in August of 2017. In the span of just 1 week, Real Madrid and Barcelona's Twitter accounts were both hacked, and clubs announced fake signings. As Real Madrid were apparently signing Messi, the fake news went viral and created a hurricane of misinformation. Then, in February of this year, the same hackers, mine, hacked Barcelona a second time, and in the process, they taunted the club's cybersecurity efforts and exposed internal conversations about Neymar. However, unlike Barcelona, Real Madrid seemed to have learned their lesson the first time. Following their attack in 2017, the club formed a 4-person cybersecurity committee to address these issues. Likewise, attacks in other sports are also instructive.
The opening ceremonies in Pyeongchang are less than a week away, but not all the hazards at this year's games will be on the slopes or on the ice.
It now looks like Russia was responsible for a hacking campaign targeting the 2018 Winter Olympics. While Olympics officials had refused to name the hackers that disrupted its internet and broadcast systems during the Pyeongchang Games opening ceremony, U.S. intelligence officials speaking to the Washington Post say Russia had compromised South Korean routers and up to 300 Olympics-related PCs in the weeks ahead of the sporting event. It's unclear.
As you just heard, big international sporting events are now also ripe for hackers. This was a big concern ahead of the 2018 World Cup in Russia.
The FA is increasing its cybersecurity measures due to hacking fears of the upcoming World Cup in Russia. The entire traveling party will be encouraged to log on to a secure network on a dedicated FA server, which will have several extra layers of security built in. Firewalls will also be strengthened and passwords encrypted due to the perceived high risk of a cyber attack in Russia. In addition, players will be given advice on their use of social media during the tournament, and all accommodations will be swept for bugging devices. This comes just after...
At the time, the English Football Association was deeply concerned about hacking from Fancy Bear, a cyber espionage organization connected to the Russian government.
Fancy Bear, perhaps the most famous name in criminal hacking today. Fancy Bear is not an individual, but rather a collection of hackers whom are widely suspected to be directly overseen and financed by Russia's GRU intelligence agency.
The year before, the group had hacked the World Anti-Doping Agency's database, releasing the private medical records of more than 100 Olympians.
Hacker group Fancy Bears has leaked a second batch of documents from the World Anti-Doping Agency. It lists dozens...
But the most serious cybersecurity breach is perhaps the biggest football story of the last 4 years. Football leaks.
Football leaks. This is enormous, okay? This threatens to change everything we know and have known about football.
A very different story began to emerge thanks to Football Leaks, a mysterious organisation that has released sensitive documents exposing the dark underbelly of football.
Football Leaks has largely been known as a whistleblowing operation, but there is mounting evidence to suggest that it was in fact a hacking operation by Portuguese national Rui Pinto. In its time, Football Leaks has exposed tax evasion,
Messi was convicted for tax fraud, in which he was sentenced to a suspended 21-month jail service.
A possible sexual assault by Cristiano Ronaldo.
Soccer star Cristiano Ronaldo will not play in upcoming international matches after being accused of rape.
And led to Manchester City being investigated and fined 10 million euros for obstructing a UEFA financial fair play investigation. This week, Pinto's trial begins in Lisbon and the football world waits to learn his fate. But while his future is still to be determined, what is clear is that hacking and cybersecurity threats in football are here to stay.
Pep, I'm sorry to labour the point, but I mean, what Dan asked there was how, in the modern era, how important is keeping data on scouting and the players that you're going to sign private?
Today, there are no secrets anymore. So look what happened in the big governments, United States, in Russia, and everywhere. Everybody knows it. So was Snowden, and so no secrets anymore. If you want to keep a secret, don't tell to a friend your site. If you are in devices, internet, or mobile phone, today everything can happen.
Sarah Lyons is the Deputy Director for Economy and Society Engagement at the National Cybersecurity Center. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about those music tracks in our episode description. This episode was co-produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today. And before you go, if you're a fan of the show and would like to support us, please sign up to our Patreon page where you'll get access to bonus episodes and extra content. And if you can't spare the cash, tell a friend instead. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.